Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. I did a video last week to celebrate the fact I'd passed 1,000 subscribers, and I have a new novel coming out in next April. And I was doing a book giveaway which runs to the end of September. I'll post the link to that video, so if you're interested in maybe getting one of those books, you can have a look, see if there's anything you fancy. But the other aspect was, as is traditional on BookTube, is a Q&A. And although I am holding that over for people to still ask questions until, again, the end of the month, I had such a brilliant response to it that I've got more than enough questions for a video, whereas if I left it to the end of the month, it may be a hugely cumbersome, long video. So, you know, I'm going to take the first lot of questions that are there now, and if no more come in, then that's fine. But here we go with the Q&A. So, Out of All Hooping asked, list some of your favourite poems and what they say to you. Well, I don't read an awful lot of poetry. I tend to find my lyricism in the lyrics of musicians like Ian Curtis of Joy Division and Blix of Bargeld of Einstürz and Neubauten. But recently I have read more poetry than I used to. And one of my favourite collections was Don't Call Us Dead by Denise Smith. It's extraordinarily powerful, personal, by a self-identifying as they who is HIV positive and is Afro-American. So all of those are covered in just such a wonderful personal way. I actually read one of these poems along with a poem by a British poet called J. Bernard from his collection Surge for Black Lives Matter. I did a video reading those. I've also used a couple of lines from one of these poems as an epigram for my current work in progress, I think. So this is definitely one of my favourite poetry collections, and he has a new one out. Sorry, they have a new one out, and I need to track that down. The other remarkable work of poetry I came across is this transcript by Heinrad Backer, which is a work of concrete poetry. So how it's visually laid out on the page, and it's about the Holocaust, and it's showing that, you know, people sort of back the Holocaust away as going, oh, it's monstrous, it's inconceivable, it's beyond words. But what this does so brilliantly, by using the words of people involved in the Holocaust, shows, no, actually, these were the words they employed, be it sort of bureaucratic words, be it propaganda words, be it dehumanising words, be it the plaintive words of those in the camp scratched into the walls. You know, it's an extraordinary piece of work, and I highly, highly recommend it. Okay. So I hope that answers the question. Brian at Bookish, if you were creating a musical supergroup, what musician would you choose for bass player, lead guitar, lead vocals, keyboards and drums? Okay, well I'm going to start with bass guitar because that was always my instrument, the one I wished I could play and tried to play, not very successfully, and I'm always much more interested in bassists than lead guitars. Normally your axe heroes are the lead guitarists, but mine are always bassists. So my first would be Jean-Jacques Bonnel of the Stranglers, whose bass sound was probably the dirtiest in the history of rock and roll. Listen to a song like Nice and Sleazy and you'll see what I mean. The next would be Steve Jameson of a band called World Domination Enterprises Limited, British sort of West London industrial dub band, and he was very influenced by reggae, and he has a very fine dub bass sound. The next would be Tracy Pugh of the band The Birthday Party, which is Nick Cave's sort of first band before he went solo, which is just the most driving, throbbing sound of your own heartbeat, you know, echoed back into your brain times 1,000. Then other bassists, Tina Weymouth of Tom Tom Club and Talking Heads, Mike Watt of Minutemen and Firehose, almost jazz bass in his case. Who else did I make a note of? Because there are so many. Oh yes, Paul Simon of The Clash, again very influenced by reggae. Adam MCA Yauk of the Beastie Boys. It has the greatest sort of fuzz, distort bass sounds that you might hear on sort of Funkadelic or Parliament, but he played a mean bass. So yeah, that's probably it for bassists. It's a little simpler for the other instruments. So for guitar, it's Andy Gill of Gang of Four, who sadly died earlier this year, probably from COVID. Gang of Four were a very sort of innovative, sort of choppy, fractured guitar sound they had, and Gill very much sort of invented that. And the other is Roland S. Howard, also The Birthday Party. The bass and drums were predominant, but occasionally Howard's guitar is just this sort of squall, very sort of low in the mix, but just extraordinary. So if you listen to a song like Sunny's Burning, and about 2/3 of the way through that, just listen to the guitar sound on that, quite extraordinary. Drums, I'm not sure I really have a favourite drummer. I'd probably go with a drum machine. Sorry. What else did we have? Oh yes, keyboards. Well, Dave Greenfield of the Stranglers is the keyboardist par exemplar. There's no one better than him. And as I said before, it was rumoured that he actually played Jean-Jacques Burnel's bass riffs on his keyboard, and that Burnel was miming them. I don't think that's true, but it attests to Greenfield's brilliance. The other keyboarder, I don't actually know who this is, but John Spencer, he of the John Spencer Blues Experience and Pussy Galore, he formed a side band with his wife, Christina Hernandez, and they're called Boss Hog. They don't record very often because she basically brings up their kids while Spencer's off touring the world with the John Spencer's Blues Experience. But there's some great sort of keyboard noodles on a lot of their songs, including one called Structure. And I just love the sound of that. So you've got this really sort of heavy bass and guitar, and you have this sort of quite tinny, chintzy keyboard, which is great. And vocals, probably Burning Spear, the reggae artist, for the soul, Ian Curtis and Leslie Woods of the Au Pairs for the pain and the poetry, and Marquis Smith for the snarl. The Quiet Midden from Canada asks, what are some of your favourite autobiographies about musicians? I do read the occasional music book, but they tend to be more about sort of music genres rather than individual musicians. I find individual musicians not necessarily great writers, great authors. There are a couple that I'm interested in but haven't picked up yet. One is Steve Hanley, the bassist in The Fall, who wrote a book on The Fall, being in The Fall, which, you know, if you know anything about Marquis Smith, would make for an interesting read, but I haven't picked it up yet. And the other is Girlfriend in the Band by Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, who was married to Thurston Moore. They were both, you know, leading lights of Sonic Youth, but it all broke up sort of in bad rancour when Thurston Moore had been stepping out on her and in the end divorced her, and she wrote this book. Now I'm interested in that, and I'm very interested in Sonic Youth, but the problem is I saw her interviewed on TV a couple of times on YouTube, and she's a really dull interviewee. She can barely string two words together, so I wonder how good the book is, unless it's been heavily ghost written. So to give you an idea of some of the music theme books I've read, I read a book on Sufi music, which is one of my favourite, you know, the Qawwali, if you've, you know, so Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan is the most sort of preeminent, or was the most preeminent practitioner of Qawwali music. So I love Sufi music. I wish I knew a bit more about the sort of non-music side of Sufis and like its beliefs and practices and stuff. I read one called Blissed Out by Simon Reynolds, who used to be a music journalist with Sounds, I think, Sounds magazine. And it was about the original shoegazing trend of bands like Loop, Chapter House, Slow Dive, all these sorts of bands, which wasn't a music I was particularly into, but Reynolds is very good at sort of getting behind the music. I mean, it is incredibly hard to write about music. How many different ways can you describe a drum solo or you know, some drumming virtuoso? You know, words do not lend themselves easily to music, and I think that's another reason I don't really read autobiographies. I read a book called Our Band Could Change Your Life, which looked at about 8 to 10 American new wave and punk bands, most of which I like. and I got very little out of that, other than being a bit disillusioned about a couple of the bands I like because of how badly behaved they were. And that's the thing about rock and roll. A lot of these tales are going to be about bad behaviour, trashing hotel rooms, that sort of thing. Yeah, one book, again, a book by a musician that sounded interesting, but I don't think I'd get it, is by Will Sargent, who was the bassist in Spacemen 3, who were a very, very druggy group and sung, a lot of their songs were about drugs. And he described, the little snippet that I've read, that one night he was so high on whatever he was high that when it came to playing his bass guitar on stage, he saw 2 fretboards instead of one, and was finding it really, really difficult. I have read both of Nick Cave's novels. The first one, The Ass Saw the Angel, is very good, if somewhat derivative in its style and tone. The second one, Buddy Munro, was execrable. Can't even say that word, it's that bad. I hope that answers the question. Andrew Russell asks, who do you think is an up-and-coming author worth keeping an eye on? Well, I find it quite hard to recommend authors. But if I stuck my neck out, this is an American author called Ryan Chapman, of Sri Lankan descent. This is called Riots I Have Known. It's his debut novel last year. Quite funny. It's about a sort of prison riot with a prisoner who is the editor of the in-house prison poetry magazine. He sort of managed to sort of blockade himself because he fears that someone's coming after him in the middle of this riot. The whole riot is just a premise for a diversion so that this person can pay off a score because, of an editorial decision, which I thought was quite funny. And the other one is Sophie Ward, who is a debut novelist for her book Love and Other Thought Experiments, which has been longlisted for the Booker Prize, which I love, will be in my top books of 2020. It's kind of weird to think that she's a debut novelist because she's a well-known movie actress who's been around for many, many years. She's probably my age or not far short of it. But as a novelist, she is a debut novelist, so worth keeping an eye out because I really enjoyed that book. LS, who I assume is from Holland, to judge by the question framed. How do you find out about the books you read? Which place do you get your reading list from? And apart from that, I'd like to know if you have if you've read any Dutch literature, and if so, which ones and how did you like them? So dealing with the second bit first, I read The Discomfort of Evening, the Booker International Prize winner. I read it a few months ago. I didn't particularly, I thought it was well written, but I didn't particularly get on with it because it's basically set on a rural setting, and is set amongst quite a sort of stern religious family, which are 2 sort of tropes that I'm not particularly interested in reading about. I did think it was good. It did sort of do more than I was expecting it to do in terms of I got more out of it than I thought I would. But ultimately, it's those 2 tropes sort of I could only go so far in my enjoyment of it, but I can see why it won the prize. Now the other book is really annoying because I can't remember who it's by and what it was called. It was a book about a kidnapping. And I read this many years ago because I was still in my previous job, which I haven't been in since 2008. So we're talking 12 years ago. And I lent the book to someone I was at that work with, and I never got it back. And I haven't been able to track it down, but it was really, really good. So sorry I can't be more specific about that. And as to how do I find out about books and what place do I get my reading list from? This is going to be a really sort of disappointing answer because I don't know. I'm not plugged into publishing houses. I don't get lists of forthcoming publisher, what's coming out, new books and stuff. You might get sort of prompts from Goodreads, but only a month ahead. If you try and track down, because I don't take a daily newspaper, I'm not subscribed to any, so I don't get any of their sort of upcoming books to look out for in the year. I just because the books I read tend to be of a type which is loosely on the non-commercial, slightly experimental wing. And I suppose that's quite a smaller world, and you just pick up references where you might read an interview with an author and they cite another author in that world, and then you go and track them down. So I just have that facility of picking up on the wire, just names or books to look out for. It's not something I actively, put together myself. And the other thing is BookTube. There's some wonderful, booktubers who alert me to books that I've never heard of and authors I've never heard of. Within my sphere, particularly, I'd say Leaf by Leaf, The Book Chemist. So BookTube is my answer to that. Next question. So I just have to scroll down here. Abby T. Hearing more about your book would be great, and about how you feel you have developed as a writer. Well, I'm not going to say too much more about my book at this stage, because I really need to get my head round how I'm going to market it. I finished editing it just recently. Now my thoughts have to turn to marketing, and I'm not in that headspace yet to talk about themes or influences or whatever. But I will be making videos about that nearer the time. But in terms of the other question, how do you feel you've developed as a writer? I think it's a really interesting question, because I'm not conscious of having developed as a writer, but obviously I have, and the way I write has changed. I used to, basically, when I got an idea, I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't even write anything for 6 months. I just let it seethe away in the unconscious. And after 6 months, it would sort of come out almost fully formed. And then I would write very, very intensively for about a month to get the first draft out. And then it would be all about the editing. And during that first draft stage, I would have a soundtrack, which I would religiously stick to. I wouldn't bring in any other songs to it. I mean, I'd make a playlist. It wouldn't necessarily be, one band or whatever. So again, when I finished writing of an evening and I came back to the next day, I would put the music on, and that would take me straight back into the ambience of the, where I had been in the night before, of writing the book. So, but I no longer do that either. Now I just write as and when. I write in quite short bursts. I might only write a paragraph during a day, but that would be fine. And so it knits together much more intricately, because it's not written in great chunks in intensive bursts. So that has changed. And also I think I'm now writing about much more general themes, such as sort of philosophical ideas about existence and being, or scientific ideas about perception, rather than the more sort of situationally located themes of my early books. So my debut novel was set in a sort of holiday resort in Kavos in Corfu in Greece. It was about sort of badly behaved British youth with their values. It was about exile. It was about gangsterism. If I used any of those types of themes in writing that I'm doing now, they would not be the central focus of the book. The central focus of the book would be, as I say, something much more philosophical. So, for example, my work in progress that I'm currently writing, that's about sort of the notion of perception and phenomenology, basically, the balance between objectivity and subjectivity, and, are we pure? Is everything about us and the world the product of our consciousness, or is there a material reality? In which case, how does the human brain perceiving those? Where does that fit in on the spectrum? So it's those sort of bigger sort of philosophical questions. So I have changed a lot, but not. It sort of crept up on me gradually. I wasn't noticing, and it wasn't a conscious decision to go in these different directions. That is how I've developed. But as I say, just through writing, not through sitting down and reviewing, going, no, I need to go this way, or I need to be more this or less that. But I love that question. Next question is from, forgive me, I'm not sure how you pronounce this. I think it's Theanan, or Tianan. If you could, what writer, past or present, would you mentor or give feedback to while they were in the middle of writing a book you've read? Which is a great concept. If you could erase one of your own published writings from history and rewrite it or erase it completely, would you, and why? Okay, so the first one about being a mentor or giving feedback to a writer while they were writing is quite funny, because obviously I'm the junior partner in this, but allowing for that inversion. I'd say Michel Houellebecq. I would like to look over his shoulder as he was writing, because he's one of my favourite writers, but sometimes he's just so slapdash and sloppy. It's almost as if he can't be bothered, that he loses the will to write within a novel. So parts of the novel are fantastic, and other parts are just really terribly, terribly undercooked. On a sort of paragraph or a page basis, it's a strange thing, and I don't know how he gets away with it with his editors, because it's that blatant. So I think I would like to look over Houellebecq's shoulder and go, no, come on, put your back into it, Michel. And he'd respond by lighting up a cigarette and blowing smoke in my face, I'm sure. And the second part of that question is, if you could erase one of your own published writings from history and rewrite it, or erase it completely, would you, and why? Well, I stand by everything I've put out there. That's not to say they're perfect, and they're not. The debut novel was probably quite overwritten. But I wouldn't have put it out there if I didn't, if someone wanted to round on me for it and criticise it for anything, how it's written or what's in it, or, the themes, I would defend it. I put it out there because I believe in it, I guess. So, no, I wouldn't erase anything. Next question is from our very own booktuber Valentino Garcia. I'd love to know, when did you decide to start writing? Do you feel you needed to live to have stories to tell before writing? Or was it something you felt a necessary part of your life? And do you have a daily number of words you strive for? Well, the first thing is, I don't have a daily word count. I've never had one. If I had a deadline with a publishing contract specifying it, that might change but I've never had one up till now with an advance and things like that, so that's not an issue. When did I decide to start writing? I started as a teenager, and I think, like a lot of people, I wrote really crappy poetry, which I imagine would be song lyrics, because I wanted to be a musician. Didn't have the ability to do that. Then I started writing stage plays when I was at university, because there was a stage space. It was free to use and experiment and learn your craft on. And I only started writing plays when my twin boys came along, because I was the main child rearer. So I couldn't hang out at theatre bars anymore. So I wrote prose through the night when they were very young, and I was doing their bottle feeds and stuff. I wrote because I felt a need to express certain things, really, as part of trying to figure out the world. Now it's less about sort of the political things about the world, and more about the world of being and reality itself that I'm trying to figure out. But it's always that need to probe and explore the things around me in order to gain maybe better knowledge about myself. I believe that every author writes autobiographically, even in fiction, because you can only draw on what you've personally experienced or read or researched yourself. You can't write from outside yourself if you have no inkling of what that thing is. So is it a necessary part of my life? Yeah, it always has been, I suppose, to some extent, although it didn't necessarily focus itself in writing novels. As I say, it took other forms prior to that. But I've always felt the need to try and get to grips with things through words, I guess. And again, just as I say, the pace that I write at is the pace that I write at. It can be lots of words in a day or none. I don't beat myself up about that anymore. So I don't have a daily word rate. So Ros from I always get this name wrong, Scally-Dandling about the books, which I think this is one of my favourite questions. How do you think living in London affects you as a writer? Or do you think where you live or where you come from doesn't have an impact? Well, personally, I've only ever lived in London other than my 3 years at university. It must have shaped who I am. Therefore, on that level, it does impact everything that I write, and everything that I am. Having said that, I've not set a book in London until my current work in progress, which is. But I tend not to set them in places that I visited and have a sort of a concept of, other than how I see them in my mind. So I've set one book in Omagh in Northern Ireland, I've set one book in Wakefield in Yorkshire, I've set another book in Kavos in Greece. Now, I've never been to any of these places. I travel to them in my mind in the same way as I travel out to my characters in my mind, because they are very different, in terms of what they do in life, what their jobs are. They're very different from me. I mean, they have to be based on me, as I say, because I think all writing is autobiographical. But if I pitch them distant from me and I have to travel out towards them, that way I discover lesser known parts of myself. And it's the same for places, I think, really. So London isn't overtly in my writing, but like I say, it must flow through everything I do because of the type of person I am. And I think the lollipop on the top of that is in Three Dreams in the Key of G. I had a section where it's describing a boy who has an American father and an English mother, and they divorce, and he's sort of caroming from one continent to the other, trying to find his place because he doesn't feel either British or American. And my mother was from Manchester in the northwest of England, and my dad was from London. And even though I didn't grow up in Manchester, because I grew up in London, even though I very rarely went there, I feel half Mancunian. It runs through me very strongly like a stick of rock. Now again, it's a sort of a fantasy or a symbolic notion of being Mancunian, because I have no reality to bring to it. But I feel it so strongly that I wanted to express that, and I did that in Three Dreams in the Key of G with this America-UK thing. JC from Philly, JC Philly. As a Philadelphia area resident, I'm curious to know how an urbane Londoner, thank you very much, became a Philadelphia Phillies fan, which is a baseball team for those who don't know. And two, how did you get started as a novelist? Was there a breakthrough event when you just felt you had to go for it? Or were you of the precocious saffron fur type? Well, on the Philadelphia Phillies thing, when I was 14, I went for my first family holiday to the US. And during the day, I did all the tourist things with them. And in the evening, they knew lots of people in New York, where we were mainly based. And so they went out sort of drinking and eating with them. And I was sort of left stuck in the hotel with the TV. And the thing I liked to watch most was baseball. And I remember I watched the Philadelphia Phillies, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Cincinnati Reds, who were very big then with Johnny Bench and Pete Rose, and the San Francisco Giants. So I could have chosen any one of those four teams. But the team I fell in love with the most were the Phillies of Mike Schmidt, Greg Luzinski, Gary Maddox with his amazing afro hair, and Lefty Carlton, the pitcher. And I've stuck with them ever since, which is, in a pre-internet age, it was quite hard to follow baseball. Basically, you just saw in the English newspapers, such and such have won the World Series. And that would be basically all the information you could get about baseball. But 2 years after that visit, the Philadelphia Phillies did in fact win the World Series. And I've stuck with them ever since. And my son, who is American sports mad, he follows the Phillies in baseball, he follows the Giants the New York Giants in NFL, and he follows the New York Knicks in baseball. So 2 New York teams and 1 Philly team. And the other part of it, I will just say, he's just completed a year study abroad at Penn State and was really looking forward to going to watch the Phillies at Citizens Bank Park, but unfortunately, of course, COVID put a stop to that. Now, as to how did you get started as a novelist? Well, like I say, it came quite late to me because I was doing drama, stage plays. So I was, let's see, my sons are 22 now, so 1998. No, 1999 I probably started writing novels. So the part of the question that goes, was there a breakthrough event? I don't think I've broken through yet. I mean, Three Dreams in the Key of G was shortlisted for not the Booker Prize, which obviously helped a lot. I thought would represent a breakthrough, but I haven't been able to get a a multi-book deal, well, by which I mean two, or an agent on the back of it. And I had, you know, the book that I've just sold to a publisher, I was basically in exactly the same position trying to move that as I was with Three Dreams in the Key of G. So my career didn't advance in any way, despite, you know, that feather in my cap of that nomination. So I don't think there has been a breakthrough. I wasn't precocious, certainly. How did I get started? Well, I suppose, you know, my playwriting, I got interested, was quite wordy anyway, and I got interested in the experimental side of theatre, which is more the sort of use of the actors' bodies rather than the dialogue that you wrote. And I found that pretty easy to transfer over to prose writing. A, as I say, because I was wordy, but B, the things I was interested in theatre had equivalences in novel writing, which were all about form rather than, I don't know, relationships and conflicts and all that sort of thing. Those are in my book, but they're never very central. So I hope that answers the question, JC. So Sean Gigapool, on a related sports subject, goes, do you support a football club? I do. I support Derby County. I've supported them since I was 6 years old, which means they're the longest relationship I've had in my life other than with my mother. I have rather distanced myself from football in recent years because it's become a very bloated sport dominated by money, to the extent I think that reduces the competitiveness of the sport. We're not like American sports where they have a draft to try and realign and rebalance teams. So baseball is my number one sport over football, but I do still follow football. But I, you know, for example, Derby, whenever they're on TV live coverage, I don't bother tuning into the matches. So I have rather fallen out of love with it. Sarah at Hardcover Hearts asks, I've always loved your musical references on Twitter, especially punk, so I'd love to know about your best punk show story and also your top punk bands list, please. Well, the first thing to say is I guess I veer more towards what was called new wave than punk. Punk was fairly limited musically. It was more about attitude and lyrics and emotion, raw emotion, which was very sort of musically limited, and quickly transformed, both in the UK and the US, into much more interesting angular music called new wave. So a lot of my favourite bands were sort of new wave rather than punk. So bands like Gang of Four, the Au Pairs, who were sort of two men and two women, sort of proved that men and women could create great art together on an equal basis. Joy Division, Birthday Party, Sonic Youth, bands like that. And from new wave, the other trend that I really liked was what I call art noise or industrial music. So bands like Einstürzende, Neubauten, World Domination Enterprises, Tools You Can Trust, bands like this. Swans in America I was particularly fond of. And as to I don't have one particular gig story, but I can very quickly rattle off quite a few different ones. So I was at an Einstürzende Neubauten concert once, and because I have glasses, I've never worn contacts, I always try and get up against the stage, because then no one can knock my glasses off from the front. So people pile into the back of me when they're pogoing or whatever. That's fine. I can normally keep my glasses on. And at this Neubauten gig, there was a couple in front of me, so I was one away from the front of the stage. And when Neubauten come on, who play this very sort of heavy industrial music, they don't have drum kits, they have bits of found metal that they hit. And they basically proceeded to have sex throughout the entire gig, Neubauten gig, and I was stood right. It was, you know, it spoilt my enjoyment of the gig, let's put it that way. So there was that. Another one is The Jam, were a British sort of punk band who sort of became mods, if you can imagine that transition. And they were doing 4 nights in succession in London. 2 were at a venue called the Rainbow, and then 2 were at Hammersmith Palais. And I had a ticket for the Hammersmith Palais, so the third one in the tour. And the night before, the Rainbow, the Jam fans were coming out for the end of the concert at the same time as a real punk band called The Exploited. Their fans were coming out of their concert nearby, and they set upon the Jam fans, because by then the Jam were viewed as mods and not punks. So that for the Hammersmith Palais gig, it was a really tense, angry atmosphere. The band knew what happened to their fans, and it showed in their performance. It was one of the most extraordinary performances I've ever been to. But that was serendipity, you know. I could have been at the Rainbow one and got beaten up, but instead I was at the very next night's show where, you know, was the payoff really. The first gig I ever went to was a punk gig by an Northern Irish band called Stiff Little Fingers. I guess I was 14, 15, and I was absolutely terrified because punk had a really bad reputation for violence. And there were all these sort of, you know, quite imposing looking punks with their studded leather jackets and stuff like that. But once I got inside the venue, I realised half my school were there. So, yeah, it was fine. The last gig I ever went to was a gig by the Pixies, and I just ruptured my ankle playing football a week before. So I was, instead of being right up against the stage, I was right at the back of the venue to protect my ankle. But because the Pixies were the type of band they were, the whole audience were moshing. And I spent the whole gig just sort of throwing people back who were sort of thrown out of it back towards me. I was throwing them off me to protect my ankle. And I thought, I'm too old for this. And I've never been to a gig since. I did see New Order at a Cambridge May ball. And my claim to fame there was, as I mentioned, I did try and be a bass guitarist. I did own a bass guitar for a while. And I had it with me in college. And a mate of mine was a proper guitarist, and his band were the support act to New Order at this college ball. And he asked to borrow my bass because even though he was a guitarist, he was playing bass that night. So my bass guitar has been on the same stage as New Order, go figure. And finally, I would say one of the best bands, punk bands I've seen live were the Dead Kennedys, American band from San Francisco. And Jenno Biafra, who was their lead singer, I'm absolutely convinced has had drama school training because he puts on a wonderful show. It's a shame they all fell out and sued each other, but there you go, that's punk for you. Rizzo asks, you're obviously a big fan of music and stand-up comedy. I am. What are your favourite books by musicians? Well, I've dealt with that, and by stand-up comedians. So I'm just going to talk about the stand-up comedians ones. Again, like I said, musicians can't write very well on the whole. It shouldn't be the same for stand-up comedians because they consider their words extremely careful. Some words land punchlines, some words are more funny than others in the context in which they use. So I always consider comedians should be good writers, but they're not. So two terrible autobiographies I've read are by comedians Peter Kay and Ian Stone. And the problem is they can't decide whether just to tell a lot of jokes or to deal in their biographical stories. So their books tend to fall between both stools. My favourite comic is Stuart Lee, who has written a work of fiction called The Perfect Four, which is perfectly competent, but just didn't do much for me. But he has written 3 books where talking about comedy and the art of stand-up comedy, and using his own different acts and analysing them in great detail, which he now does on his videos. He does the thing where you can get like speech bubbles where he adds comments as to what, you know, how he was playing the audience at that point and stuff. But the 3 books do that as well, including How I Escaped My Certain Fate, and they're brilliant. I would recommend any student of comedy watch Stuart Lee's stuff on video online and read those books. They're quite short, but they are supreme, just the amount of thought that goes into sculpting an act. And then finally, the other book, Alexei Sayle, who's a British comedian who basically is associated with the start of alternative comedy in the UK in the 80s. He wrote a comedy novel called Train to Hell, which is really funny, very, very funny. But he was funny then, and you know, he's rather become less funny and more sort of hectoring and sort of political. He was always political, but now it's more about politics and less about humour. But that book is really funny. I don't know if you can still get it. I mean, it came out, I guess, in the 80s or early 90s. My copy has fallen apart, unfortunately. Trip asks, which authors do you think have most influenced your writing? Do you believe in free will? Which are 2 very diverse questions. So on to authors of influence. I have a lot of favourite authors, but none of them have influenced me because my writing style is diametrically opposed to those, not by choice, but just because I can't write like they can. The only one I would say is that some of the ideas of Ben Marcus, who is probably my favourite contemporary author, have influenced short stories I've written, but not novels. I couldn't sustain what he does so brilliantly over a novel, like the length of a novel like he does. I only recently read David Markson for the first time a couple of years ago, and I found out that a lot of what his ideas were very similar to the ones I come to under my own steam. So if I had read him a lot earlier, maybe I would have been able to come to my ideas a lot quicker as well. But they don't really influence me. For example, one of my favourite authors is Franz Kafka, but there's nothing that Kafka and I share in our writing at all. You know, he's very, you know, precise with his language and very economical with his language, whereas I'm not. He tends to write parables, whereas I don't. But I love him, you know, but I don't write anything like him. And as to the second question, do I believe in free will? Well, I don't believe in God, so you would imagine that I do believe in free will, but I don't, because I think we are very much prisoners of our genes, so that we are biologically determined. I also think we are imprisoned by our brain chemistry. A lot of our emotions we are not in control of. They are chemical reactions in the brain. So we are chemical prisoners. And also, I think our perception, you know, we have these templates in our brain as to what reality should look like. And they're very hard to overthrow, those templates. And when some people do, they're normally called mad and locked up in sanatorium. I'm very interested in how those templates come to be lodged inside our heads as children. What's the sort of means of transmission of embedding them in our children? That form part of the subject of my book, Three Dreams in the Key of G, and to some extent in the book that's coming out next spring, Stories We Tell Our Children. There it's not looking at them as hardwired, it's looking at them very much being sort of passed down as part of our sort of socialising of our children. So yes, I don't believe in free will, but probably not for the normal reason that one would give that response. And finally, for now, Jason over at Byways in Booklands asks 4 quick questions. How well or badly do you take editorial advice when finishing up a book for publication? Well, it's never really cropped up, Jason, because my work is unconventional and not of the mainstream, and I think editors respect that. They might not fully understand the logic of what I'm trying to do, but they respect it is all of a piece. So I've had light touch responses from editors, which is nice. One exception where I had a book of flash fiction edited, and the editor objected to my use of the word mayhap, even though it was a historical piece. And we went back and forth on that, and I lost. Question 2. Do you have any favourite album cover art? Well, funny enough, I blogged for, I think, Albie's Media. I'll post a link if I can find it, on my 10 favourite album covers. This was my number 1. The Cure debut album, 3 Imaginary Boys. And I just loved that it had sort of 3 everyday household objects to stand in for the 3-piece members of the band. And also that use of pink, because in the 1980s, no, in fact it was earlier than that, 1979, pink wasn't really a colour used much in sort of commercial arts world outside of Barbie dolls. My other next favourite album cover is Free Your Ass and Your Mind Will Follow by soul funk band Funkadelic. Question 3. Which Walker Sensations are your favourite? I'm partial to the Sweet Chili myself. Well, if you caught Walker Sensations behind me, they're my son. I bought them for my son, not for me, because I'm not a fan of artisanal crisps. I like, my favourite used to be good old Golden Wonder cheese and onion, but Golden Wonder have since gone out of business. So I now have Walker's crisp, but not the Sensation range, the ordinary ready salted or salt and vinegar. And finally, can I take you for a pint when I eventually get back to London? And if so, what's your favourite tipple? Yes, you can take me for a pint. If we're in a pub, it'll be a pint of lemonade. And if we're in a restaurant, it will be a pint of water, because I'm teetotal and have been for many years now. When, as an insomniac, one of the treatments I sought to undertake was acupuncture with Chinese herbs. And the acupuncturist said, look, if you're taking these herbs, don't drink alcohol, because the alcohol will just flush them straight through your system before they've had a chance to do anything. So I knocked alcohol on the head then in my, I'm guessing, late 20s. And I've never felt a need to go back since. I am still an insomniac, though. I will say also that when I did used to drink, it contributed to my insomnia, because I could feel the alcohol pulsing through my blood. So Jason, if you'll still have me, I'd love to have that drink. So hi guys, this is Mark. 3 weeks later, I never got round to publishing the video when I intended to, for various reasons. But there has been one more set of questions that come in I thought I would answer. That is from Moon Poem. You mentioned the influence of William Burroughs just now. Will you give your opinion of beat literature in general, and which authors, if any, you'd recommend to Steve Donoghue? Also, I'm a great fan of the abstract expressionist movement, and Rothko in particular. It appears you may be as well. And finally, did you see the play Red? Thoughts? I haven't seen the play Red. I don't know who it's by. If you give me a bit more information, I can go and look into it. I wonder if it's a lot of times plays don't make it out of their home countries. Obviously, a lot of them do, but it's quite possible that if that's, say, an American play, that it hasn't come over to the UK. I don't know. Okay, so going back to the other two questions. Abstract expressionist movement, it appears you maybe as well. Yes, I have to say that abstract expressionism is probably my favourite artistic movement of them all. I think it has something to... I'm not particularly interested in figurative art, and what I like about abstract art obviously is it takes the figure out of it, and it, be it Mondrian or be it Rothko, they're either sort of just aids to contemplation, or they're sort of much more geometric, such as Mondrian is, and in a way of trying to sort of perceive the world. So his Boogie Woogie Broadway, I think that was him, sort of mimicking the sort of New York grid street system and things like that. It's weird, because as a writer, obviously, I'm all about the human, but with art, I find that in a way the human gets in the way. I'm much more interested in ways of seeing, that sort of concept provided by John Berger, that, what can art tell us about reality? So the Impressionists, how they changed our views on how we perceive things, and the Cubists, how they, I love all that conceptually, I love all that sort of stuff. So that abstract expressionism is my favourite art form, and Rothko for me is head and shoulders my favourite. Now going back to the beats, will you give your opinion of beat literature in general? Which authors, if any, you'd recommend to Steve Donoghue? Well, the first thing is, I don't think I could recommend any beat author to Steve Donoghue that he's not already very, very familiar with and has probably read their entire catalogue. So I'm not going to deign to challenge Steve that he hasn't read something. I'm not a fan of the beats. I think Burroughs used the label when it suited him, and he overtly also rejected when people called him a beat. He hung out with those guys. So as I say, when it suited him, he was a beat, and when he didn't like his art being pigeonholed that way, he rejected it. I read On the Road, didn't get on with it at all. I mean, Kerouac, I can't abide Kerouac. Bukowski, I kind of understand what he does, but again, I haven't picked up a Bukowski book in 30 years and have no desire to do it. Some of the beat poets, I like Ginsberg, who I suppose is definitively a beat, as though getting away from that. So I like some of the beat poetry, but in terms of beat prose, not for me, I'm afraid. So there you have it. Those are all the questions that I received, and again, thank you very much for sending them in. Just to let you know that I now need to turn my attention to sorting out the book giveaway. I haven't sort of done the spreadsheet yet, but it looks like most of the books have only got one claimant on, which is kind of useful. there may be 1 or 2 books I need to do some sort of draw out of a hat to see who gets it. So in my next video, I will be purely dedicated to, you know, saying who got what in the giveaway. I think there's about 10 or 12 books, and a call for those people to make contact with me, and how to make contact with me, to give me your addresses. As I say, I'm happy to post anywhere in the world. Now, until that's done, I'm quite happy for people to come in late still, for any of the books. You'll need to go back and watch my original call for a giveaway video, which I'll post a link in here. I will say though that if you come in October for a book that someone else has already put in for, you probably won't get it. But if it's a book that no one's put in a claim for, I'm still happy to send it to you. So yeah, okay, I hope all that makes sense. So as I say, so this will go up, this video will go up, and then as quickly as possible I will follow up with the giveaway, you know, who got what. So hopefully that will be this week. I think I need to order some envelopes, so I'm not promising that the books will go out this week, but I will get them all out in one job lot as soon as I can, because I only want to make one visit to the post office in a COVID struck London. Okay, so once again, thank you all so much for some brilliant questions. If anyone wants to sort of come back or follow up on any of those, I'm more than happy to answer in the comments below. Until my giveaway video next time, thanks very much.